Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends, if I may, welcome to another in the series of EU Council Presidency handover events, co-organized jointly by European Policy Center, CEP, here in Belgrade, and EU Info Center. Today, we are marking the handover between the Croatian presidency of the Council, which was held by Croatia in the first semester of 2020, and handover to Germany in the second semester of 2020. On today's panel, I have the honor of moderating the discussion with His Excellency Sam Fabrizi, the Ambassador and Head of Delegation of the European Union to the Republic of Serbia, His Excellency Hidayet Biščević, Ambassador of the Republic of Croatia to the Republic of Serbia, His Excellency Thomas Schieb, Ambassador to the Federal Republic of Germany to the Republic of Serbia, and my dear esteemed colleague Srđan Nestorović, Chairman of the Governing Board of European Policy Center. We will have around 1 hour for discussion with the panelists, after which there will be a 30-minute Q&A session. So just briefly to explain to all the attendees, all of you who are following us today, who are taking part in the discussion as attendees, how we will proceed with the discussion. Since we are also broadcasting this event on Facebook, I will be taking questions both through Facebook and through the Zoom platform. On the Zoom platform, I will be taking questions through the Q&A option. So please, if you have a question, do ask it in the Q&A session. And questions can also be asked through Facebook, which will then be referred to me through the web page of the European Policy Center and EU in Serbia, EU Srbiji. In your questions, just to be very brief and be very concise, please. The other possibility to ask a question is by raising your hand in the Zoom app, which you can find this option under the list of participants in the Zoom window. And I will probably have, and I hope I will have some limited time to allow a few attendees to ask their questions live. So we will bring you into the webinar to ask your question, and I would like to ask all of you who are invited to ask your questions directly to turn on your video and of course unmute your mic when you are given the floor to ask your question. And important, before moving on to the content, before really proceeding with the event, one more important a procedural note, which concerns interpretation. This event is going to be held entirely in English, but we have ensured simultaneous interpretation to Serbian. And I will repeat this information in Serbian as well, just in case. To access the Serbian interpretation, you need to click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and then click, interestingly enough, on French, because Serbian is unfortunately not yet among the languages that Zoom is offering interpretation to. But rest assured, you will hear Serbian interpretation. Sada da samo da ponovim, znači događaj će biti na engleskom, ali smo obezbedili simultani prevod na srpski. Ako vam je potreban prevod na srpski jezik, koji može da se prati samo kroz Zoom platformu, to moram da naglasim, možete kliknuti u Zoom aplikaciji dugme Interpretation, tako stoji, i na dnu, to dugme se nalazi na dnu Zoom stranice i onda pritisnite interesantno francuski, zato što srpski još uvek nije ponuđen među jezicima za koje se nudi prevod na Zoomu. Tako da, znači, kada kliknete na francuski, dobit ćete prevod na srpski. For all of those who are following this event in English, this was completely unnecessary information, but still we needed to go over this quickly. My name is Milena Lazarević. I'm a co-founder and program director of European Policy Center, CEP in Belgrade, and I am very honored and very happy to be the moderator of today's event. So let's start. The Croatian presidency has completely unexpectedly been marked by the COVID-19 pandemic. it has become a major focus of everything that has been going on over the past 4 or so months. Bearing in mind how serious the consequences of this crisis are, Croatia has indeed, especially as a first-time EU presidency, been given a very difficult, and it has been sort of handed very difficult and very challenging task to harmonize all the interests of the EU member states in this unprecedented situation. This period was also marked by the departure of the United Kingdom from the EU, the final departure, as well as by continued negotiations regarding the future of the relations with the UK. But despite all these turbulent circumstances, Croatia has managed to maintain enlargement on the EU's agenda. And the best indicator of this was the green light to open accession negotiations, which was given to Albania and North Macedonia, and a new enlargement summit, which was held virtually and moderated and facilitated by the Croatian presidency. Today, we will discuss how all of these challenges and issues have been dealt through the Croatian presidency, how and has the EU passed the test of solidarity in the fight against the pandemic. Also, how Germany is going to adapt its program and its priorities to the ongoing crisis and to the expectations of this crisis in the next 6 months, but also what is the place of the Western Balkans and Serbia in all of this, which is probably for our little microcosmos here, one of the most important questions. I will start the discussion by addressing the first question to Ambassador Fabrizi. And I would like to ask you in 5 to 7 minutes to give us your assessment of how the EU has worked together under the Croatian presidency. Firstly, to fight off the immediate challenges related to the COVID-19 pandemic, but then also in the second part of your intervention to also provide us with a little bit of your insight of how the focus on enlargement and on Serbia has been maintained, and how you assess these results. Please, Ambassador Fabrizi.
Thank you very much, and good morning to my fellow co-panelists, to Milena for inviting us, and all the many friends that are connected to this event. And it's a pleasure for me I'm a little bit a part of the furniture, as every 6 months there is a new incoming presidency, which is great, but certainly we are this year celebrating the 10 years of the Lisbon Treaty, which introduced some permanent fixture. I wouldn't call furniture, but fixture into the landscape of the EU. So the presidency of the European Council, the role of the High Rep and the EAS, and the role of the EU delegation on the ground. And certainly it's a great pleasure to be in the presence of the Croatian and German colleague. Certainly, as you said, this past 6 months, which is going to conclude tomorrow, hasn't been business as usual. I would say there's been quite a demanding 6 months, also because of the COVID-19 has completely changed the narrative, the policy objective, and as in any case, has changed the capacity and the need to react to this unexpected event. But I would say it's fair to say to our own Croatian colleague who bravely held the fort for the past 6 months for the first time since they joined the European Union. And I remember which were the priority we discussed with the Croatian friends at the beginning of, was in January, was in Europe, the develop, the connect, the protect, but also was a Europe that has a role on the global scene, starting from the immediate neighborhood, so basically starting from the Western Balkans. So I think it's credit to the Croatian presidency to have kept this priority, and has have helped to keep the enlargement into the policy in the past 6 months, notwithstanding everything that have happened. Of course, the original plan has been changed, not only for the Croatian presidency, but overall on the EU policy on a global scale for everybody, because the COVID has introduced a new theme, has brought us back to the essential issue, health and life, something that we have to sometimes forget and derubricate of technical issues, has a strong impact on economy, has had a strong impact on foreign policy. So basically from the COVID, a number of key elements has been called into question. But I would say that from the EU point of view, which belong beyond the responsibility of the Croatian presidency, and let me go a little bit, zoom out on the role of the EU as such, after some more initial moment where the parameter of this crisis were a little bit uncertain, because at the beginning it turned out as to be a health crisis, and the European Union has limited responsibilities on health matter, which is left mostly to member states. It was immediately clear there was much more than a health crisis. The health crisis was severe within the European Union. It was turning into an economic crisis. And certainly the Commission and as a trigger point of the EU policies have unleashed a number of policies in the health sector, in the economic sector, that basically has brought the response of the EU, in the neighborhood, in a global scale on the forefront. Certainly one of the key words has been resilience. I think I was finding some definition of resilience, and one I found on social media, and I love the social media because bring you to your attention a number of issues, is to how to resilience is basically put each of us in a sort of a trauma or a stress, bring all of us in a sense of victim. Resilience is to transform this state of victimism into a state of responder, and even you can thrive in a resilience. So I think if we have to, I don't want to jump to conclusion, but I will say if this is the hand of baton or handover between the Croats and the German, will be how to not only bring this resilience, but how to embed this resilience in the European Union policies, because we will not come back to a pre-COVID crisis. The situation has changed. The question is how we can bring a new normality, living with this COVID-19, and continue to do the work we are supposed to do. So certainly the Croats friend found themselves to the whole European Union to adjust and react. And I think if we look at what the EU did, it was, you can see a clear parallelism or specularity from what the EU did and what the European did with the Western Balkans. So focus firstly on health, an immediate response, so the question of keeping the single market within the European Union where all the material, PPE material could travel, question of solidarity, question of immediate health for within the European Union. And after the big proposal by the European Commission and agreed by the Council on the economic side. So if we look in parallel what happened in these 6 months, the same has happened in the Western Balkans. The idea of immediate health, I think on the 20th of March, so 5 days after the state of emergency, we here as the EU delegation, we were able to sign the first contract for funding transport of PPE from all over the world to Serbia, a number of other measures that we took with the Serbian authorities for the health system, for the protection of most vulnerable, the element on economic recovery. So I think this bulk of work, it was extremely good work made within the EU, was somehow consolidated as far as we talk with the Western Balkan in the Zagreb summit. There's been a moment of reality check of what was already done within the European Union, with the idea to continue to work, especially on the economic side, for the second part of the year, which would be the economic recovery program for the European Union in the Western Balkans clearly linked to the approval of the multi-financial framework agreement, basically the budget of the European Union. So basically, if we have to look at the next, I know that it will be, certainly we listen to our Croats and German colleague, the message will be continuity. This is what the Lisbon Treaty introduced, a sense of continuity in the system, a question of resilience, how to build resilient, and how all this work done already in these 6 months will be completed under the German presidency, which basically will be a COVID presidency, as this need to be still to be managed, and certainly to keep the Western Balkan part of our own response. This is what already happened, both on the health, on the economy, but also to keep enlarging a vital part of the foreign policy of the European Union. So you mentioned North Macedonia and Albania was opened the negotiation. This was an extremely important breakthrough, despite the crisis and despite everybody around the world was trying to close the border, trying to protect himself. We kept enlargement policy open, launching negotiation. Of course, enlargement, will discuss with the Serbian authority how to move forward on the reforms. We know that the Council last week decided not to open at this moment any additional chapter, but the work continues to do so, and certainly under the German presidency, but more generally under the EU work in the next months, we need to see how to make the reform moving forward. I step here.
I will come back. Yes, I will come back to the looking forward at the end, because I will give you. I will have another question for you, Mr. Fabrizi, at the very end of the discussion. Thank you very much, and I take as the main messages the need to ensure continuity, resilience, and to keep the Western Balkans part of EU's response to the ongoing crisis. Now over to His Excellency Ambassador Biščević. And I have two questions for you, Ambassador. I will ask the first one first. Croatian presidency has probably been one of the most challenging presidencies since the beginning of EU integration. And despite being the newest EU member, Croatia has managed to steer the discussions in the new online environment and even keep enlargement on the agenda, as I mentioned before. Could you give us an insight into how the Council of the EU has worked since the beginning of the pandemic, and give us some examples of the main successes and some key challenges that you can share with us, both in terms of the overall presidency priorities, but also more in relation to the enlargement policy? And I give you around 7 minutes for this first question. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you and to try to share with you some of the comments and impressions over the Croatia's presidency. Ambassador Fabrizi summarized aptly all the challenges and what we jointly went through over the last half a year. And indeed, we assumed presidency in the, I would say, exceptional, unprecedented circumstances from the health point of view, but also from the political point of view. We had quickly to adapt and adopt to new modalities of how to preserve institutional dialogue. We have to preserve dialogue through a new, I would say, new techniques. You know that everybody is now on Zoom over the last 6 months. And we also have to preserve focus on 4 Croatian presidency targets, goals, as Ambassador Fabrizi also summarized. That is Croatia, a Europe that develops, Europe that connects, Europe that protects, and influential Europe. In these kind of difficult circumstances and challenging environment, it was really a challenge to keep focus on these four targets. But also let us not forget that the youngest EU member state took the presidency in the very challenging political environment too. It was the beginning of the new institutional setup of the European Union. It is a new commission there. There is a new parliament. We have this challenging Brexit process. We assume presidency at the point where debate on and differences also over the multi-annual financial framework were evident among the member states. So all in all, I would say notwithstanding the overall political situation on the continent and in the world, this strategically challenging background has also influenced the developments within the Union, among the member states, relations between the EU institutions and outside partners, and so forth. So I would agree with Ambassador Fabrizi that Croatia managed to go through in these difficult circumstances. Well, for example, we initiated at the very beginning of the health crisis different mechanisms of cooperation within the EU on how to arrange crisis response, cross-border cooperation, repatriation. The entire integrated crisis response package and mechanism was set up, and it really helped millions of people across the continent. I take personally that one of the greatest achievements, one of the two greatest achievements of the Croatian presidency is number one, agreement on the mandate on the future conference on the future of Europe. I think this is a new fundamental step in the direction of comprehensive political debate on the future of Europe. And the second one, of course, is we managed, despite the circumstances, to reinvigorate the enlargement process in the Western Balkans. We managed with great energy, given the situation and agendas of member states and their priorities, we managed to bring Western Balkans, I would say, back into the focus of the Union's attention. That is, of course, reflected in the Zagreb Summit declaration, in the decision to give green lights to North Macedonia and Albania. We have started the process of aligning new methodology of negotiation with the current negotiation process for the two countries that are already negotiating, Serbia and Montenegro. And that what is ahead of us now on the basis of these Croatia's presidency achievements is according to Zagreb Summit declaration, preparation by the Commission of the robust financial assistance to the Western Balkans, sometimes early in autumn. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Biščević. And then I will ask a follow-up question. Considering the results of the virtual Zagreb Summit in May, but also excuse me? I have, suddenly we had, just let me see, I think that the interpreters are switching. So just to make sure that we have interpretation ongoing. I think I can continue. Considering, we can hear the interpreters and I think we're not supposed to hear you. Sorry for the technical blimp. So just to repeat my question, Ambassador Biščević, considering the results of the virtual Zagreb Summit in May, but also the latest news that Serbia will not open any negotiation chapters in June, how do you see the follow-up in terms of EU's engagement with the Western Balkan countries? Just briefly, what is to be focused on?
Yes, unfortunately, despite great efforts by Croatia's presidency, Serbia was not able to open another chapter, basically because we managed to collect something like 50–60% of the positive attitudes by the member states. We consequently, of course, also unfortunately were not able to organize what we really wanted to do, intergovernmental conference. At one point, immediately after the Zagreb summit, we were considering the possible follow-ups, and we are still floating with the idea of organizing the Croatia plus Western Balkans 6 on the probably ministerial level, in order to see how the Zagreb summit declaration could be translated into intra-regional relations, agreements, and so forth. Because if you read properly, consequently, the declaration, it provides a basis, a ground for a number of bilateral and regional issues that could be addressed in the near future. Technically speaking, now the task is to, as I said, to align these new methodology with the current negotiating frameworks and to align with the future, or already starting in the future negotiations with Northern Macedonia and Albania. What will be happening on the political front in terms of preserving the political energy created by the Zagreb summit and Croatian presidency in the region would very much depend on the future activities of the German presidency, on the dialogue between the member states over not only over the currently most prominent issues like recovery fund or multi-annual financial framework, but also on their political attitude towards the region.
Thank you, Ambassador Biščević, and this gives me a perfect opportunity to continue the discussion with the German ambassador, Ambassador Schieb. So, Ambassador Schieb, I will start with the following. Everybody does expect, and everybody knows that the German presidency of the Council will be marked predominantly by continued fight against the COVID-19 pandemic and its socioeconomic consequences. So could you give us an insight into how Germany plans to focus its work as the convener and chief moderator of the Council discussions in this second semester of 2020? Both in terms of the thematic priorities, but also it might be interesting to also hear if there are any specificities considering possible adaptations, considering continued travel restrictions, possible new waves of the pandemic in the second half of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Milena. Hello. I'd like to greet all of you, my co-panelists, and all those who are listening. Well, first, let me say thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to have the opportunity now to present the key priorities of our presidency. But before I start, I would like to very much thank the Croatian presidency for the dedication over the last months to manage this crisis and to manage the European response to this crisis. And I would particularly highlight the Zagreb summit, which sent a very important signal of solidarity to the Western Balkan countries. So thank you for that. And also at the same time, I would like to say that I'm very much looking forward to close cooperation with our so-called trio partners, Portugal and Slovenia. There's always a trio in order to have more continuity, because obviously there are so many complex issues, dossiers on the agenda, which will not be sorted out in 6 months' time. So it's important to give the baton, so to say, to the following presidency and to coordinate our programs as much as possible. These are indeed extraordinary times, and this Zoom format is very much telling. And if we only knew, how all the numbers develop, and I think at this very moment, travel restriction is being discussed in Brussels, and whether travel restrictions will be lifted and when, under which conditions, etc., etc. So I'm afraid, regarding your very last question, it would be very difficult for me to give any substantial answer, because this would really be trying to look into the glass bowl, so to say. But definitely the pandemic is still here, still with us, so the crisis is far from being over. The last German presidency, by the way, was in the first half of 2007. Chancellor Merkel was already around, and also in former times were not easy. There was also a lot of talk about the EU in a crisis and the need for a new start after two negative referenda in France and the Netherlands on the so-called constitutional treaty. But finally, we managed to adopt the Treaty of Lisbon. It took a while, and there was a crisis clearly, but we overcame the crisis. The treaty was adopted. Now today, and here I can quote the German Chancellor, who said in the German Bundestag, the pandemic and its impact on the European economy is the biggest challenge in the history of Europe. So this is quite something. Yeah? So, and of course, the pandemic forced us, Germany, to so to say, to rethink our presidency. At the same time, I think we are cautiously optimistic. Yeah? We are not pessimistic that we are going to manage and going to eventually overcome the crisis. However, what is needed now, of course, is solidarity, willingness to compromise. We were talking about the big recovery package, which is now being discussed in Brussels. We need pragmatism, and of course, we need a lot of international cooperation to manage and eventually overcome the crisis. And so our presidency motto is together for Europe's recovery. And I think this is a motto which is fitting. And then, of course, the expectations are pretty high, maybe a bit too high. Of course, we have to be realistic, and we have to see, because it's always, we have 6 months. Yeah? We have to see what we can achieve in 6 months. Now, a couple of remarks on our so-called primary objectives. Of course, we will continue the immediate crisis management in order to overcome the corona-related health crisis. We will work together on the implementation of a coordinated EU exit strategy to lift remaining restrictions and to re-establish the European single market. We will foster Europe's solidarity and unity by coordinating a sustainable recovery strategy, which has to address the economic but also the social consequences of the pandemic, and to support the transition towards a sustainable economy. And of course, we have to start identifying lessons learned for an even more effective internal and external crisis management in the future. But I can assure you, the German government, colleagues in Berlin and Brussels are very much dedicated to our agenda, and we think there is room for cautious optimism. Everybody understands the urgency, and everybody is very much aware of what is at stake. And this is, how should I say, maybe almost a no-brainer, but it's still important, I think, to say. We should not squander an opportunity, so to say. We will not eventually go back to normal as we used to live and work, but we have to take into account lessons learned, and we have to adapt to the new situation. Yeah. So, and this is why we also think it's very important to invest in sustainability. So, talking about green recovery, and as everybody knows, the EU Commission has presented a very ambitious proposal, a Green Deal, and we want to have an equally ambitious follow-up in the Council. This is very important. Very important is, of course, climate change, digital transformation. Both dossiers, topics will remain crucial topics on our agenda. And then, of course, I mean, what was mentioned already, the new multi-annual financial framework, which is absolutely key for economic recovery. We have the negotiations on the future relationship with the UK on the agenda. We would like to make progress on the EU's migration and asylum policy. We would like to strengthen the rule of law as a key foundation of the EU. And this is, I think, quite interesting because we would like to have, in addition to the existing procedures, we aim at preventive and forward-looking mechanisms, allowing for a dialogue on rule of law among EU member states. And also to be maybe be more concrete, we support the Commission's proposal to make EU spending within the EU conditional upon respect for the rule of law in member states. So in a way, this is aligning the inner EU approach with the principle of conditionality we apply in the context of EU enlargement. So I think this is quite an interesting project. So, and then, of course, very important as well is strengthening the EU's capacity to act at the global level, stabilizing the neighborhood of the European Union, supporting the Western Balkans, etc. I think we are going to come to the, let's say, the external dimension later on. Let me just briefly say that, of course, organizing the presidency is also technically pretty challenging. We do hope that at least a few physical events, political events, so to say, can take place. And we hope that social distancing rules will allow the envisaged summit between the European Union and the African Union to take place as scheduled at the end of October. So to conclude, we will try to live up to the high expectations. We also want to set in motion changes in the European Union, and we think these changes they center on two words that describe in a way the entire program of the German presidency in a nutshell, and this is solidarity and sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Schieb. If you allow me a little joke, the plan which lies ahead of the German presidency looks like my weekly agenda that I make on a Sunday evening. And I do hope that it will be possible to achieve all this, because there is certainly a big number of priorities that need to be dealt with at the same time. But it is also very encouraging to see that important and fundamental issues such as rule of law have not fallen off the agenda despite the ongoing crisis and the immediate challenges that the European Union is facing. If you allow me just one short follow-up question. Very few people actually expected the German presidency to focus on enlargement in the Western Balkans. But at the same time, we have witnessed since the beginning of the COVID crisis that this region is really particularly sensitive to the changing relations between the global powers, between the EU, USA, China, and Russia. Having in mind the geopolitical aspirations of the current Commission and of the EU at large, how and what can the German presidency do to keep engagement with this region? We heard from Ambassador Fabrizi that the Western Balkans is to be held as a sort of a part of the solution and part of the fight against this entire crisis. So in a way, can the Western Balkans be sort of mainstreamed? Can this enlargement region be mainstreamed as part of the overall EU's activities? You mentioned something of the sort also when you spoke about the rule of law agenda, and I think that probably, or I'm wondering if there is more space to do that. So maybe not to work specifically only on enlargement, but engagement with the region at large. Could you comment on that?
Thank you. How much time do I have? A couple of
Another
minutes.
3 to 4 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, it's of course.
If I can just, sorry to interrupt, we always give the incoming presidency a little bit more time because they're the ones presenting their plans and their work, and this is already, so this is why ambassadorship is getting a little bit more time. Please.
Thank you, Milena. Well, I think it's of course it's a difficult question, I have to say. Of course, I mean, as I said, the Western Balkans has this European perspective. So in a way, we always keep the Western Balkans. It's always very present, so to say. Whatever I think projects we are following, and of course we always. This goes without saying, yeah, as future members of the European Union, of course, we have to take into account their interests and needs. But maybe also just to confirm, yeah, because indeed there are so many complex dossiers on the agenda, but this does not mean that Western Balkans and enlargement will somehow be forgotten. Yeah? Germany always was and will remain a very strong advocate of EU membership and the European perspective of the Western Balkan countries. This is clear. We are grateful to the Croatian presidency, that the Croatian presidency, as my Croatian colleague said, managed to, in a way, put it back very much back on track with a positive. With the Zagreb summit, etc. So this is what I can say. Yeah? Enlargement, Western Balkans are among the very important dossiers in the presidency program. And what we are trying to do concretely is to finalize the negotiation frameworks and then start first accession talks with North Macedonia, and if possible also with Albania once it fulfills the necessary conditions. Yeah. And indeed we do hope that there will be a new momentum regarding the accession negotiations with Serbia. Yeah. Again, to say the pace of accession talks is based on the progress in the rule of law. Yeah. Such as fight against corruption, strengthening media freedom, reform of the judiciary. And we are confident, I'm confident that the new Serbian government, given the very strong mandates it obtained in the elections, will increase the pace of reform. And then hopefully we will also have some chapters, or let's see what's going to happen, yeah, but that there will be a IGC at the end of the German presidency. Now, briefly, because I think this is important, because I haven't talked about the external dimension yet, but among our priorities is, of course, strengthening sovereignty. So how to keep Europe functioning in a world in which the global balance is shifting, and you can argue shifting away from Europe. Yeah. So and this is something we have very much kind of on our agenda. Europe must be able to act independently. We have to strengthen EU's overall capacity as a powerful foreign policy actor at the global level. And the first step is, so to say, to analyze the EU's so-called strategic dependencies. And just one example,
apparently, I hope the figures are right, that 90% of all medicines the WHO considers essential are from China or India. And also we have to look at 5G, storage and information technology, logistics, etc., etc. So this will also be something we have to look into, yeah, to kind of prepare the European Union, or strengthen the European Union, strengthen its capacity to act independently at the global stage. And of course, we have some concrete projects on the agenda. We will try to revitalize the high-level political dialogue between the EU and the USA. And we would like to intensify the dialogue with China. And we do hope that it will be possible to reschedule this summit, EU-China summit, as soon as possible. We think it is extremely important for the EU member states, to speak with one voice when we speak to China. Now, yeah. So again, I think we have to seize the opportunity and see to its safeguards that the European Union emerges strengthened from this crisis. If we will succeed, I don't know, but at least we will try. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Šib, and I take it from you that Serbia and the Western Balkans will definitely be an integral part of all of these efforts, also to engage with one voice with the big actors such as China that you just spoke about. Now over to my colleague Srđan. Ambassador Šib already mentioned the issue of progress or lack of progress and how it impacts on the lack of progress also. He mentioned lack of progress in the rule of law and how it impacts the lack of progress in the negotiation process. Now, how do you see Serbia's lack of progress in the previous semester? How are we to interpret the fact that for the first time Serbia is not opening any negotiation chapters with the EU? I start with that.
Well, thank you very much, Milana, for this very easy question to answer. But first of all, I would like to thank our panelists for being our guests, and to thank you especially and your wonderful moderating skills that you managed to get these additional answers from Ambassador Šib, because I honestly believe that majority of citizens in Serbia believe that Serbia and the Western Balkan countries are the most important part of the EU at this moment, and that everything evolves around Serbia and the rest of the region. While the reality is so complex, and I thank you very much, Ambassador Šib, for explaining that loud and clear, because it makes the perspective of the EU integration process much more tangible, much more visible. Citizens can put our current situation into the broader picture of what's going on in the EU and how EU is changing itself while trying to enlarge. And this is something that obviously we are promoting very strongly, that this deepening of the EU based on the principles of solidarity and sovereignty, as you rightfully pointed out, must be combined with the protection of this the concept of strategic autonomy that can only be functional if the Western Balkan countries are integrated in the EU, safe and sound. Now, coming back to your question, it is very difficult to answer what is the situation, because if you take a closer look at the reaction of Serbian leadership, it seems that in the past couple of years, all these independent reports, even some European Commission regular reports, were greeted with a dose of humor, and I don't think that they were accepted in the most serious fashion as they should have been. If you take a look back in 2019, Serbia managed to open just 2 chapters, 1 per each semester. And we were always confronted with some sort of explanation that there was a lack of consensus among the EU member states, that the EU was occupied with some other issues, while all of us who read these reports very carefully from the Freedom House, from the Transparency International, from the Reporters Without Frontiers, and all the other independent indexes, and the non-papers on the rule of law produced by the European Commission, we were quite rightfully, I would say, concerned that Serbia does not pay a right amount of attention to these very critical arguments that were presented to our government and to our leadership. So it is quite obvious that now that we, for the first time since the start of the EU accession process, get in this situation that no chapters will be open, we can very, I would say, with a high degree of certainty say that this is because of the lack of progress achieved, especially in the area of the rule of law. If you read carefully the latest non-paper on the state of the rule of law, you will find out, even in a quantitative analysis, that the word delay is mentioned 20 times. And this is a 20 pages document, which means that, statistically, on each and every single page, you will find some delays. And, if the delay is just a couple of weeks or even months, then you can associate these delays to ongoing pandemic or some other important political processes that draw attention of the government from these sometimes are understood as a technical things. But if you know that constitutional reform has been on hold, if you know that anti-corruption strategy was adopted for the period 2013 up to 2018, and that Serbia still does not have a new anti-corruption strategy. If you know that anti-discrimination strategy expired in 2018, or that there are serious delays in the area of gender equality, violence against women, and domestic violence, that the law on free access of information has been significantly delayed, then there is simply a very clear picture that was not on the top of agenda of this government. And this is why, unfortunately, as I said, for the first time, Serbia will not be in a position to open a single negotiating chapter. This needs to be met with a serious thinking in the government. This is a warning. This is a warning that not only one or two, but more EU member states are not satisfied with the tempo of the reforms in this crucial chapter, especially in the chapter 23, that deals with the independence of judiciary, fight against corruption, fundamental rights. And that unfortunately creates a very weak image of Serbia as a country that understands the values and the principles upon which the EU membership is based on. And here I would like to make a connection with what Ambassador Fabrizi said. I recently witnessed a very interesting debate where panelists were discussing what is more important, resilience or efficiency, in the light of the COVID crisis. And the both concepts are legitimate, but obviously those systems who are more democratically based, where you have democratic institutions, when you have clearly divided powers between legislative, executive, and judicial, these systems are more resilient than those who might look more resemble like those one-party systems based on the state-run economy here, obviously, I'm thinking about China, and this is why this concept of resilience is so important for the future development of Serbia. If Serbia fails to deliver on the democratic institutions, on the rule of law, obviously the level of our resilience to these outside shocks and disturbances is going to be less evident.
And can I just ask you, what would be your recommendation to the EU institutions and EU governments in terms of using this second semester of 2020 to, let's say, maybe offer a clearer message as to where the responsibility for the lack of progress lies, especially because we have witnessed that in the past, the sort of conflict between the support and praises which were coming to the reforms and to the efforts, some alleged efforts to reform the country, and then low level of progress was creating space also to the government officials to blame it on the EU when only one chapter would be opened, and when journalists and CSOs would ask why we're opening only one chapter. Now, for the first time, we're not opening any chapters. This is a crisis, but it's also an opportunity. How can we make sure that it is viewed and used as an opportunity to reinvigorate the process?
Once again, before I answer your direct question, I need to stress once more that the fact that Serbia is not going to open a single chapter by the end of Croatian presidency is a warning, and that should be read as a very, very serious warning. The next level in potential deterioration of the situation would be imposition of the imbalance or suspension clause. Now, this is not going to happen because it is also depending on internal European Union's dynamism and the relationship between different stakeholders within the EU. But this is just to explain how situation is serious, and as such, it should be properly understood. I think for the German presidency, it would be extremely important from the perspective of Serbia and the rest of the Western Balkan countries would be to try to find a consensus on start of or rather to organizing the first IGC with North Macedonia and Albania, and to adopt the negotiating framework as soon as possible. I think both countries have waited along, and I think it would be very good for Serbia as well, because it will bring a new dynamism in the EU accession process. It will bring a new sense of competition between the countries, and it will be very interesting to see what would be the reaction of Serbian government, future government, to see that North Macedonian judiciary is more capable or graded as more successful than Serbian. I'm quite positive that would have a very positive impact on motivation in Serbia to speed up the reforms as well. The second thing, which is going to play a very significant influence on the EU accession process of the Western Balkan countries, Serbia included, will be adoption of this economic and investment plan. This is something that needs to be understood within the concept of solidarity, but also it can serve as a hefty price if it is based on the principle of conditionality. I'm strongly convinced that the countries who are not capable of delivering on the rule of law and democratic values should be held responsible under this conditionality principle, which is basically already part of our negotiating framework, and it's integrity part of this process. And in that sense, this can be a very hefty price tag or carrot, if you wish, to perhaps motivate autocrats in the region to perhaps do more when it comes to the respect of democratic principles and the rule of law. And the third point that I would like to see during the German presidency as functioning is to have this new methodology fully implemented on the ground, and to have a clear guidelines is how this methodology is going to be implemented in the case of the countries which have adopted it. Now, just to add, and this is something perhaps not for the German presidency, but for the Serbian new government, it also needs to prepare for the continuation of the process. It needs to make a clear revision or assessment what has been achieved so far and what has not been achieved, and why is that so. It needs also to come up with a serious assessment of the capacities that Serbia has, that comes to the human resources, financial resources, institutional resources for the implementation of the EU policies, because we are advocating for Serbia in different EU policies like green policy or energy policy, but the question is whether we have the capacities to play a significant role in these policies, and to come up with an objective plan with a clear indicators of the success in order to regain the trust that we are actually serious when we speak about EU being our strategic goal.
Okay, thank you, Srđan. Here I would like to stop you because this gives me perfect introduction into the last question that I will ask to Ambassador Fabrizi. Looking ahead for the period of the German presidency with regards to its enlargement policy, and especially in terms of ensuring tangible benefits for the citizens while simultaneously applying strict and fair conditionality, according to the new methodology, what are your expectations? What can be achieved in the next 6 months? Is it achievable to start accession negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania? And can the EU ensure this reinvigorated stick and carrot approach that Srđan also mentioned in the second part of his intervention?
Well, be very brief also to give time for some Q&A that I see floating. First of all,
yes, exactly. I did not stress, but this is as it's a follow-up question, 3 to 4 minutes.
Good luck to the German friend. This is the 13th presidency, so there's is not something business for them. We be challenging is there. I would say. The enlargement is a process and is a reforms, and basically in 6 months you don't cannot change the landscape. I think we use the next 6 months to make progress. How much progress will depend on. I hope you hear me. You hear me? My microphone
there was,
is okay?
There were some interruptions, but I think it's better now.
It's better now. So basically, we have to make best use of the next 6 months. I think the parameters are there. We have an enlargement policy to deliver, which has its own complex mechanism, but it's complex, but it's mysterious. It's simple. To make reform, I think we lost. This is my connection. So basically,
yes, I'm sorry that I'm interrupting you, but perhaps if you disable your video, perhaps we might be able to hear you better in case there is a problem.
Is it going better now? Is it better?
Let's try. I think it might be.
Okay, so it is a complex process, the enlargement, but it's not a mystic. Microphone will be back.
I'm sorry, Ambassador. Yeah, I think that we really cannot follow you, unfortunately. I will now open the floor for some questions, and hopefully, if Ambassador Fabrizi's connection improves, Ambassador can come back to this point in the Q&A. Can you all hear me well? Is it okay when I speak? You can follow me. Okay, good. So I have already a few questions that have been posed during the panel. And the first questions which were addressed come from Ms. Tanja Sovrlić, TV N1 reporter. She asked 3 questions, but she told me that the first one has more or less been answered to. So I will pose the second 2 questions. Tanja has not indicated who the questions are for specifically, so I will ask you to, my panelists, to raise your hand if you would like to comment on a particular question. The first one says, President Vučić said that it is possible for Serbia to join the EU by 2026. Do you think that this is related to the negotiations with Pristina, and do you know something about this dialogue which gives room for this optimism? Do you know what is the reason for this optimism? And the second question is, there are more and more cases of COVID-19 in Serbia. Could that affect the opening of the EU borders for Serbia? And I would actually assume that the second question is maybe more directed at Ambassador Fabrizi, but if anybody would be able to provide an answer to these, maybe to the first question. Ambassadorship.
I think I won't be able to answer this question. I think, but what I can say, or what I know, that this very question is being discussed at the moment in Brussels. So I think we should know by tomorrow at the latest whether the travel restrictions will be lifted or not. So this has been discussed in Brussels, I think, last Friday and also today. But I don't know the outcome, so to say, the final outcome. So I think we have to wait. But what I can say is, of course, I mean, also in Berlin, we are following the developments in this region also very closely, no doubt. And if maybe, but I don't want to. But since I have the floor, maybe also trying to answer the first question. I mean, it very much depends on Serbia. I think it's pretty clear what our expectations are. Germany is here to help to support Serbia on its way towards EU membership. But in the end, it's up to Serbia to determine the pace of reforms. And this, of course, then the date of eventual membership will simply depend on the pace of reforms. And regarding the so-called normalization dialogue, yes, we do hope that the dialogue will be resumed as soon as possible, and we are optimistic that this is going to happen very soon, already in July. And yes, indeed, also this is chapter 35 needs to be addressed, solved before a membership is possible. But I think it's very, very difficult to talk about concrete dates because it's a merit-based process, so to say, and it's a process. Thank you.
Yes, I think that speculation as to the reasons behind these sudden statements of the president are sort of expected or and understandable because they came at the same time as this visit to Brussels and the restarting of the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue. Maybe now I can move on to, since we don't have Ambassador Fabrizi back yet, unfortunately, and we did have a technical rehearsal today, and everything went well, but you see Murphy's Law during the event itself, something. Okay, Ambassador Fabrizi says that he can hear us, but we cannot see Ambassador Fabrizi. This is the problem. I will now I will now ask the second question, which comes from Jana Bulajic from Newsmax Adria. What can Serbia expect from the German presidency of the EU, and what can Kosovo expect from the German presidency? Do you think that Pristina can get the visa liberalization in the next 6 months? And I will also add another question, so somebody can maybe prepare for this. This could be a question also for Ambassador Fabrizi if he manages to join in. And I think this is just a note to Anessa, my colleague who is doing the technical support, that she might need to let Ambassador Fabrizi back into panelists.
Okay.
Might be among the attendees now, please. So the other question is, I suppose it was supposed to say when will the recovery program be available, because the question just reads, will the recovery program be available? But I think that probably the idea was to ask when this recovery program will be available. I assume that the question refers to the EU's recovery program, but maybe also we could add to this some information about the economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans, because at one point there was news that it would come in by the end of this year, in the autumn this year, but then there was another news that it would come in spring. So I think there is a little bit of uncertainty and unclarity about when this new economic and investment plan for the Balkans is going to be presented. So maybe first this question about the expectations for Serbia and Kosovo, and then the question on recovery program and economic and investment program. Ambassador Shib, you can go, since the first question was specifically about the German president.
Okay, and I think I'm afraid the second question would need to be answered by Sam Fabrizi.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, what can Serbia expect? I mean, what can Kosovo expect? I'm only the ambassador to Serbia, so but of course, I mean, visa liberalization would be important, yes, indeed, but I'm not able to give any date. So there has to be an agreement among EU member states, and let's see. But it's clearly a very important issue. And well, as I said, we hope that we will have more momentum regarding the accession talks with Serbia in the second half of 2020. Yeah. And of course, I mean, this is of course also very important, but here again at this stage for me difficult to be very concrete, so to say. Of course, economic recovery in the EU, in the Western Balkans, will be very much on top of our agenda, and of course, the support package for the Western Balkans of 3.3 billion euros needs now to be implemented, and as far as we can be helpful, we will be helpful, of course. So this is definitely very much on our agenda. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Shib, and maybe Ambassador Fabrizi, if you have anything to add with regards to the recovery program as well as the separate economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans, when can they be expected?
Yeah, I hope you hear me now. I'm back. Maybe just complete the telegraphic thought, and I was saying that also the next will be on keep the Europe healthy, keep the economic recovery going, keep the reform progressing, and move on. My microphone is down again. So
unfortunately, you're breaking up again. Yes.
My connection, and so happy to do next time. Sorry.
But now it was fine again when you the last sentence we could hear definitely. We heard to keep the EU healthy and to keep the recovery ongoing, and after that you started breaking off.
I add rule of law, progress on the reform of rule of law, and advance the dialogue with Pristina. Okay. As I said, this is the 4 priorities. There's nothing new. This is the process. We have to embed in this complex process in a pandemic time. So the question is how to embed our response to economy, to the COVID, maintaining our own priorities. If you hear me on your question, the package in autumn will be a link to the MFF. As you know, the European Union set its own budget for 7 years. Is it clear that all the resources that will come to the Western Balkan region will come from the next budget? So the budget will be completed, the MFF for 7 years, to have also element for addressing the economic recovery of the region. The region economically will also benefit not only from the European Union solidarity, but will benefit from the growth if you don't have the fundamental, both on the economic side and on the rule of law, helping the system to grow. To do our own homework. The stronger the European Union recovery will be, the easier will be for Serbia to recover, also because the Serbian economy is very much linked to the European Union. Germany and Italy are the first and the second trade partner of the country. It's clear that those markets will grow, Serbia will grow. So this is what I think about the economic recovery. I hope you have heard at least 50% of what I said.
Yes, we have. I think that switching off the video definitely helps. Thank you very much, Ambassador Fabrizi. And I think that this next question maybe I can address to Srđan and Ambassador Biščević. Ms. Gordana Čomić is asking, what is your assessment on how the EU decision not to open any negotiation chapter will affect the perception of the Serbian people about the EU? Will it decrease or increase the support for membership, or will people just not care and not react? So who would like to go first? Srđan, Ambassador Biščević, please go.
Hello, you hear me? Yeah. Well, in trying to answer this question, I think the most important thing at this point in time is the perception. And I would advise leadership here not to present the latest development or lack of development publicly as a setback that would give a sort of push to skeptics. I think even at this moment, Serbia should reinvigorate the process of negotiations. Serbia should, well, in particular, given the different inclinations in terms of political orientation of the country and so forth. I was just looking today in the morning, Serbia is negotiating already for 7 years. And Serbia has opened 51% of the chapters. I think this is a call for reinvigoration of the process. The second issue is in a broader sense, and in particular at the point where, talking about perceptions, we have about 60 to 65% of the Serbian public very skeptical about the European Union. And I put it again in the context of different foreign policy inclination of the country. I think Serbia needs a new EU motivation. I think, of course, that the EU negotiations could also be perceived as part of solving long-standing historical duality in this country, duality between modernization and self-sufficiency. And I think this is a historical characteristic of Serbian political life, and EU negotiations should be used as a tool to resolve that issue for the benefit of Serbia and Serbia's citizens. And of course, as many of my colleagues already, co-panelists already said, development of the democratic institutions, and of course, resolving the dialogue on relations between Belgrade and Pristina, that would be the conditions from the political point of view.
Thank you, Ambassador Biščević. Srđan, would you like to also comment on Gordana's question?
Just a short remark. Unfortunately, public opinion in Serbia has been shaped obviously by the tone of the messages coming from the government. And I fully agree with Ambassador Biščević. The reaction of public will depend on how the government is going to react. I hope that there will be no dismissive smiles, as we witnessed in some previous cases, and that finally the government will have a mature response to this very grave warning, as I said, by saying, okay, we have a problem, and let's see how to pool the resources and answer this question. In my first intervention, I mentioned just some of the very important pieces of legislation and strategic documents which have been delayed for 2.5 years. This is not to do anything. This doesn't have to do anything with the Kosovo negotiation. It's not related to any high, political issue. It's a question of a clear political will, whether you are clearly dedicated to the fight against corruption and then setting out the strategic framework within which you're going to actually prove that you're capable of fighting this corrosive influence to the state system. So, as I said, it will depend on the interpretation, depend on the interpretation of primarily political leaders, how they're going to frame it. I think that it is very, very dangerous, and this is something that we witnessed in some previous times, to try cynically take away attention from these crucial points from the standpoint of view of the quality of life of Serbian citizens, and to readdress it to something else. And I hope that this time the message will be properly understood.
Thank you, Srđan. Ambassador Fabrizi has also indicated that he would like to comment on this last question. So, Ambassador Fabrizi, let's see if your mic will allow us this opportunity.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, no, thank you. No, I think it's an interesting question. First one is the Serbian EU sentiment. We have our own I did my best. Next time. Sorry. I don't know why. All right. Okay.
But every time when you start saying, oh, I'm sorry, it doesn't work, then it starts to work. So this is what really bothers me. Can you try again, one more time? I don't want to torture you, but we want. Yes?
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The last polls tell us that over 50% of Serbian people, should they be called to vote for a referendum tomorrow, an element to which we have to capitalize. But I agree with both Srđan and others that we need to progress on this reform. And I think rule of law remain key. There's a 4 element we are talking about: reform of the judiciary system, reform in the area of freedom of expression, area of fight against crime, and handling of war crimes. So that's why I said it's a complex, but it's not mysterious. We know, we need to bring this set of reform. Of course, there's economy, environment, digital, so we need to also to have all the package, but we need to bring this reform agenda at the center of the political discourse. We are being encouraged by the comments made by President Vučić in Brussels last Friday, The EU process will be the #1 priority for the new government. The government will put the EU reform agenda at the center of its work for the next 4 years. We are here to help, here to support from the interest forward. The members are also on board. I think we need to, put our sleeves up, work hard, lose this great, let's say, sentiment that Serbia has toward the European Union. I think it is in a strong of the EU, but we need to nurture this process, this sentiment with reform. We need to fact on the ground and working all of us, both in Brussels and here in Belgrade, on the same side and rowing on the same side. That's in that sense we will make progress. How many will depend on a number of circumstances, but certainly we can make progress.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I have some echo. Could you mute your microphone now, Ambassador? Okay, thank you. I just wanted to add that in the European Policy Center a couple of years ago, we conducted research which showed through statistical analysis that economic factors are the most relevant ones that determine whether Serbian people will support Serbia's EU accession or not, and mainly expectations from the overall economic development of the state. So in terms of nurturing support to EU integration in Serbia, I think it is extremely important to become even better at explaining how the EU is supporting and affecting Serbia's future EU economic development. But I think where we also need to do much more work is to explain how rule of law affects economic development and why rule of law reforms are not some abstract reforms and abstract ideas, but very down to earth and very practical issues that are going to influence Serbia's economic development as well. And I think this is the only way to get citizens also on board to support these rule of law reforms and to demand them from the government. Since we have 3 more minutes left, and I have 2 people who have asked to be included to ask their questions, I will allow them very quick, so very short to the point question. I will now allow them to talk, and then I will refer back to one of the panelists for an answer. So the first one is Sofia Vujovic. I am now allowing you to talk. Sofia, please go with your question. Unmute. I have unmuted you now. No, I haven't. Can you unmute yourself? I cannot unmute you. Sofia Vujovic. Okay, Sofia is not unmuting herself, so I will allow Alexa Ilic from CEP to ask his question. Alexa, can you unmute yourself and you ask your question, please?
Yes, hello. I've just unmuted myself. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes.
First of all, my name is Alex Ilic. I'm a junior researcher at the European Policy Center. I would like to thank the participants for a truly interesting discussion.
Please, your question, very quickly. We are ending.
So my question is above all for His Excellency Ambassador Sheep. So, Your Excellency, you've mentioned that the Western Balkans and enlargement are definitely still on the agenda. However, enlargement was low on the list of priorities presented recently by Chancellor Merkel at the Bundestag. So my question is, would it be correct to assume that there is a somewhat limited priority on expansion comparative to the Croatian presidency? Danke sehr.
Thank you, Alex. And I will add to this just one more question, which was asked through the chat. What is German official position on the Western Balkans participation in the conference on the future of Europe? The European Parliament and the Commission both agree that Western Balkans participation would be good, while it appears that member states have yet to find consensus on this issue. How likely is it that an invitation will be sent to the Western Balkans? Since the conference was mentioned already, I think it would be important to get this answer. Maybe Ambassador Biščević can also add to this last answer. I will give you both 2 minutes for these last responses, and then we will end. Please, Ambassador Šipko.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, both not easy to answer. Regarding the last one on the future of Euro conference, yes, this discussion is ongoing, but I am not able to say what the outcome will be. I don't know, to be honest. I mean, from my perspective, it's clear that we have also always to include the Western Balkans as much as we can. But when it comes to this conference, there are some institutional conditions, I think, we have to keep in mind. So I don't know what the outcome will be. The first question, yes, indeed. I mean, no doubt. We talked about the very heavy agenda, the many very complex dossiers, and indeed enlargement is maybe not on the very top of the list, but what I can assure you, it is on the list, and this is what's important. So, and the fact that it's maybe not on top does not mean that there's low interest, but the reason is that there are so many pressing issues which in the end are also decisive for the future of this. And this is foremost the recovery, the economic recovery after the crisis. Yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't spend too much time on kind of counting numbers, so who's on top and which dossier is where. Again, it is a very important dossier. We will take it very seriously. So rest assured, the Western Balkans enlargement process will figure pretty dominantly on our agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Šib. Ambassador Biščević, would you have anything to add on the conference on the future of Europe? You mentioned that this was one of the important achievements in the Croatian presidency. Can we expect the Western Balkans to receive an invitation to participate in the conference?
We should. There should be no alternative to me, in my mind. Being just a poor ambassador in Belgrade, and not pretending to be anybody's advisor, but at this point, precisely at this point, I would go for a new tempo, for a new momentum in Serbia, just as President Vučić indicated the other day. In short, symbolically, it would be a good sign to see Serbia nominating a chief negotiator, for example. For a couple of years already, Serbia is negotiating without a chief negotiator. So in short, by way of trying to conclude, Serbia should continue vigorously negotiations. And over the next couple of years, I'm quite sure the EU dialogue with strategic partners, including Russia, would also set a new landscape for Serbia's future.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Biščević. I think this offers a very nice conclusion for today's discussion. Thank you, everybody who has followed us, both through the Zoom platform and through via Facebook. Thank you, ambassadors, and thanks, Srđan, for joining us today for an honest and candid discussion, as always, and looking forward to the next event in 6 months' time. Until then, stay safe. Goodbye, everybody.